Welcome to Down Ancient Trails, the online archaeology forum of the Sharma Center for Heritage Education, India. Brush the dust off long forgotten thoughts. Slice through time and space.
Listen to stories in stone.
Whispers of voices lost in time.
Build bridges across worlds.
Curious minds reach out to the past. And travel down ancient trails.
So, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me with you. I would really like to come to India and talk to you in person, but under the circumstances, this cannot be achieved at the moment. But I promise that as soon as it will be possible, I will come. I visited twice India in the last several years, and I like it a lot. And be very glad to come and talk to you again. But until then, we'll talk. I will talk to my computer. You will look at your computer, and we'll communicate this way. I'm not very fond of that, but as Shanti says, this is the only option we have now to keep in touch. We'll do it in this way, and we'll try to survive. So the topic of my talk is a bit strange, I must admit. I know. I like about elephants. I like the Lower Paleolithic. I like bifaces. I like putting all of them together. And this is what I will try to do here in this talk. I will try not to talk so much, so we'll have time for questions and discussions, because I know that both the topic and the way that I present it, let's say, unusual. But I'm fond of unusual things, so you'll have to bear with me or step out. I mean, as you like. So the talk will be about handexes, bifaces, elephants, the Lower Paleolithic, and of these three components together in the way I see it. But before we really start, I need to begin with a short cautionary note, so we'll all be in line with what we're going to do today. So this is not a lecture as I see it. This is a kind of thinking out loud. I will share with you my thoughts. You are not obliged to agree or think this is correct, but we can talk about that. But as far as I see, this is thinking out. This will be following my own journey in ontology, and I will talk about it, reading, traveling, thinking, and so on, and doing archaeological work for sure. It will be interpreted, interpretative, speculative, and controversial, I can assure you. And some thoughts were published in the process of being hopefully published, and some will never get published. This is all published, and I can talk about that in a different talk. This talk will be, as I said, thinking out loud. So you better take these four statements in mind as we begin to talk. And again, you're free to have your own thinking on that. This is my angle, my take on the issue. Just before we start, for those who are not familiar with what is called in general, in cultural anthropology, the ontological turn, I will present shortly my view on the ontological turn, or how I see things. And again, this is my view on the angle. So the ontological turn marks a departure from anthropocentric perspectives. It's not all about humans. It's about the adoption of a cosmocentric kind of perspective. It's about the departure from the nature-culture divide. It's about an emphasis on relational epistemology, which is based on relations, on relationships. And one of the central words is relationships, and we'll get back to that later. It's about taking seriously, and seriously is in bold, indigenous worldviews. And last point, at least the way I see it, is about understanding that indigenous hunter-gatherers view the world differently than do weird societies, which is us, at least this is how I see things about Israel, Europe, the Americas. I'm not sure Israel is democratic anymore as it used to be, but Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic societies. So we are talking about two different worldviews, at least in my opinion. And I think we need to take this in mind, at least take it into consideration while we try to figure out worldviews in the past. They were thought, conceived differently than the way we are used to. At least these are, as I see it, the foundations of the ontological term, and we'll get to that soon. But I'm a traditional guy, and traditionally when I talk about elephant, and respect is the buzzword. We'll talk a lot about respect. I used to show this short video. We will see 3 short video clips during this talk. And this clip is a special homage towards India and elephants, as you'll see in a minute. I'll hope that everything works. I'll just see that I'm doing that, okay?
Yes, it's working.
Whoa, elephants.
Bow your head.
Why?
Show them respect. The elephants created this jungle, where they made furrows with their tusks, the rivers ran. Where they blew with their trunks, the leaves fell. They made all that belonged. The mountains, the trees, the birds in the tree. But they did not make you. That is why you must go.
Okay, this is a short one. Get you to the atmosphere and to the picture. And now I'll talk a bit about my ontological turn. I used archaeologists, grassroots archaeologists, field archaeologists, doing lithic analysis and so on, and I still do that now. But sometimes, let's say about 10 years ago, I became more interested in cosmology and ontology. I was always, but I became more interested in that because I realized that things are more interesting or more diverse or less simple than they look after our long time work at Kesem Cave. As Shanti mentioned, we work at Kesem Cave for almost 20 years now. And with dark, and what is interesting in this work is this kind of divide or change between the Lower Paleolithic Acheulean in the Levant and what the Levant, the late Lower Paleolithic Acheulean cultural complex, which comes after the Acheulean in terms of chronology and stratigraphy, and exhibits a different mode of adaptation, which is coupled with most probably a stage in human evolution. So around 400,000 years before present in the Levant, and specifically in the Levant, this is a local phenomenon, we see change, which is both cultural change and a biological change in humans, and we see significant changes, transformations in all aspects of life. And of course, the question is why. And after some years of studying Kesem Cave, we came with the thought, with the hypothesis that the reason, that the trigger for this change of after 1 million years of the Lower Paleolithic Acheulean was the disappearance of elephants from the Levant. And this was the point around years ago when I got in depth into understanding human-elephant relationships, and this was fascinating. And this, in a way, what brought me in dealing with ontological and cosmological aspects in an attempt to better understand what was going on in the past. So this is my first step into this interesting issue of ontology. And the second step was by getting into the study of bifaces, handexes, but not only stone hand, but bone handexes. Handexes made of megafauna bone, mostly elephant bones. We'll get to that in a minute, but this was again one of the triggers that brought me into this issue. And on top of that was this book that you see here of the picture, and I will get to this book quite often during this talk. The book is called Bringing Home Animals. It's a book about the Innu, about the native indigenous groups of northern Canada and their relationships with animals. It's the kind of a Bible of hunter-gatherers' relationships with animals. It's a wonderful book, and not only a wonderful book, I was lucky to meet of the book, Adrian Tanner. You see him here below. I met him in a conference in Cambridge in 2016, I think it was, and we got very, very closely together, and we talked for hours. And then I simply asked him, will you take me there? And he said yes. And I went to Newfoundland and to Labrador with him to visit the Innu groups that he studied. And we traveled for thousands of kilometers, and we talked, and I was lucky, and my eldest daughter also joined me. So it was a wonderful experience. Here you can see I won't talk a lot about it, but as in a tent of one of the Innu elders. This is one of the Innu elders. She's an activist. She is doing cruise travels. She is doing kayak in the rivers for the youngsters to keep the tradition of the East. Spent there a lot of time when we talked, and I came to realize firsthand some of the ontological aspects of their behavior, relations with what we call nature, with the world, with the cosmos, with animals, and so on. So this was a great experience, a kind of a revelation, and this is when I got more into these ontologicals way of thinking. So getting back to our business, mostly in Paleolithic archaeology, we divide between utilitarian or practical elements like stone, bones, plants, earth, refuse, structures, and so on, and what we call non-utilitarian, like ornaments, burial, deposits, ritual symbols, and we call these functional, like things people are doing on a daily basis for making a living, and we call them items which are in the spiritual or social sphere of human activity, and these are things that we expect people to do on very particular times. And I suggest that we should mix all of them together, and we should not divide it, but again, we will get to that sooner than later. So just to make things clear, I will tell you what I see in current archaeological and anthropological thinking about kind of relationships with the world. So the way I see it is that past and present hunter-gatherers were not just exploiting the natural. Indigenous societies view the world in a unique way, as composed of other than human persons capable of thinking, feeling, deciding, etc. In such situation, multiple worlds exist in parallel. A world of humans, a world of animals, a world of stones, a world of mountains, a world of rivers, and so on. The human world is one of many, and humans must live side by the other entities and pay them respect. This is the most important part. Pay them respect in order to ensure the world order. People are concerned about world order. They are concerned that things will stay as they are, as they used, and for doing that, they pay respect to everything else. Again, this is the way I see. This is the way many people that advocate the ontological and cosmological way of thinking think. And again, this summary of events is its own evolution. And if we'll follow briefly, in a very simplistic way, the evolution of relevant anthropological thinking, it all started with animism, with the study of what was called animal souls, and of course shamanism. But this is an old way of thinking about things. It evolved into what was termed, of course, new animism. New animism that left spirits alone and moved to talk about other than human persons, not spirits, these which are equal to humans in many aspects, but are different. And the third stage of this evolution is the concept of perspectivism and other ontological perspectives, advocated by a series of very smart thinkers like Eduardo de Castro, Viveros de Castro, like Bruno Latour. This is a hardcore anthropological philosophical thinking, which is really interesting and it is extremely relevant for archaeology. So if you have some leisure in these times, these are good items to read. And we'll step forward. Now I'll define when I use the word ontology, what I mean, and we use the word cosmology, what I mean. I will just say that, at least in my view, every human group in the past and in the present has its own ontology and its own cosmology, but there's no single human group which has no ontology or cosmology. And this is why all indigenous groups nowadays, for example, has their own creation myths. The creation myths are based on the ontology and cosmology, and I believe it was like that in the past, but I still have to put some evidence in order to or convince you, or at least let you start thinking about that. Sorry. So when I say, and I will say a lot ontology, I mean a theory about the world. Every group has a theory about the world, about the way the world is by humans, and the way humans perceive their place in the world. So putting it simply, this is what I mean by the word ontology. How people see how they see their place in the world. When I use the word cosmology, I usually mean world order. It's about a set of knowledge, interpretations, and practices of a society or culture related to explanation about the origins and evolution of the universe, as well as the role and the meaning of life in the world within the universe or cosmos. So this is the way the world was created and how things operate in the world. So this is about ontology, and this is about cosmology. These are two different terms, two different concepts. They reside together. The term ontology is much more specific, and the term cosmology is much more general, at least in the way I see it. Of course, there are different meanings or different views on these issues. For example, very well with the ontology and cosmology of the Maya and the Inka of Central America, because they left a lot of evidence. They left also written evidence. So we know that for them, as for many more, as for many more indigenous groups, the world is divided to three. The cosmos is divided to three parts. There is also always the lower world. There is always and there's the upper world, and people are anxious of getting in touch, getting connected with this. There are different animal taxa which are related to the different worlds, like birds. Different kind of birds are always related to the upper. All kind of reptiles and other animals are always related to the lower world, to the underworld. And humans are in need of getting in touch with all these elements, mostly via animals. So these are two examples of which is familiar to us, and for indigenous groups which we don't have so many evidence, we have to reconstruct ourselves their cosmology. So it's all about human behavior, and what we try to do is reconstruct and understand human behavior. So for doing this, usually we look at the resources, the availability of resources, about climate and the environment, about technological capabilities, about competition or conflict, about cognitive capacity, size, and so on and so forth, in order to try to understand human behavior in the past. We try to employ all kinds of methods in order to understand what was led human to do what they did in the past, like human behavioral ecology, like optimal foraging theory, like niche construction theory, and so on. And we don't have very good answers, at least in my mind. Again, this is all about humans and nothing but humans. And usually this approach failed to explain human behavior in the past. And I think that we need a more cosmocentric approach, and I will try to present such an approach to you if I succeed and if I have enough water. So, humans are not rational. We know that. There are many books about that, interesting books by an Israeli very smart professor, but other humans are motivated by multiple factors, mostly by some sort of belief. This is true in the present, as we know. Suggest this was true in the past as well. People have a theory about the world and the way it operates. They have it now, and I guess this was likewise. So why do we expect early humans to be rational? We know that we are not. Why do we expect them to be? Why do we examine past human behavior of efficiency, survival, and other rational criteria? Why, when we come across evidence for non-rational or non-practical behavior, we create symbolic or ritual? We assume that in these cases, other considerations than rationale were guiding the human behavior. Why assume that such consideration acted only in cases and not on a daily basis? I suggest it acted on a daily basis and everything mixed together. There was no divide between sacred and profane, between everyday activity and ritual activity. I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, in a meeting in Italy, in Turin, about Neanderthal art, I met this interesting guy. Originally, he's from this place in Australia, in New South Wales. His name is Freeman, and he presented a wonderful example of beads made of that his clan is doing for generations. They have a history of thousands of years of making these bead necklaces. In a regular in a common archaeological thinking interpretation, this would be body decoration to personal identity, to group identity, to status, to gender. Again, it's all about humans. But for the Aboriginal Australians, it's not about humans at all. It's about the fish. For them, when these beads are getting to the shore, it's a sign that the big fish are coming and they will have a lot of food. So specific season, they put these bead necklaces in order to get connected with the fish, in order to call the fish to come. So it has nothing to do with identity, nothing to do with gender. It has to do with the fish and with the world. So this is one example how this of archaeological evidence can be connected to a cosmocentric view and not anthropocentric view. And this is just one example. I'll give you another example. This is a stone we found at Kesem Cave. This is an example of different views of Western archaeologists and indigenous archaeologists and how they would look at this stone. So a stone was found. A Western archaeologist, this guy, would ask what it is. Was it shaped? Is there any use where? Can we 3D scan it and so on? And if the answer is no, well, it will be just for the indigenous archaeologist or the indigenous person, the question will be, is it alive? Not what it is, but is it alive? Stones are capable of being alive, some of the stones. And if the stone is alive in his perception, it's a non-human, and it might be the most meaningful item at the site. So these are two different perspectives which are advocated by two different worldviews, the weird one, the indigenous one. And I will use some words of people who are much more clever than me and know how to write better than me. This is Kimmerer. She's working on human relationships in North America with plants, with grass. She's beautifully, and I'll use this quote for her 2018 paper. I can send, if you're interested in the reference or the books, write me an email and I will send them to you, those that I have with pleasure. So I'll just read this. A landscape of streams and lakes, in her words, mountains and rich valleys, shared by thousands of species of plants and animals, is understood through the lens of Western materialistic worldview as a wealth of ecosystem services or natural resources. Through the lens of traditional indigenous philosophy, the living world is understood not as a collection of exploitable resources, but as a set of relationships and responsibilities. Again, relationships and responsibilities. These are the two most important words, and this is how she suggests indigenous people view the world in terms of relationships and responsibilities. And if you'll bear with me, I will let her speak minutes. I hope it will work and that you have enough patience to see this beautiful short clip.
If I could choose just a single element of the traditional teachings that we're called to pick up, it would be the teachings of the honorable harvest, which were taught us by the plants, who give us everything that we need. It's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world, a very sophisticated ethical protocol. One of the first steps of the honorable harvest is to understand that the lives that we are taking are the lives of generous beings, of sovereign beings. And in order to accept their gift, we owe them at least our attention. To care for them, we must know what they need. And at the very minimum, we should know their names. And yet, the average American can name over 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it a surprise that we have accepted a political system that grants personhood to corporations and no status at all for wild rice and redwoods? The protocols for the honorable harvest are not really written down, but if they were, it would look something like this. When you get to the woods, you don't just start grabbing everything in sight. We're taught never to take the first plant that you see, and that means you'll never take the last. This is a prescription with inherent conservation value. And then if we encounter another plant, we ask permission. I've always been taught to address that plant, to introduce myself, and tell it what it is that I have come for. If you're going to take a life, you have to be personally accountable for it. I know there are places where if you talk to a plant, they think you are crazy, but in our way, it's just good manners. If you're going to ask, you have to listen for the answer. You can listen in different ways, pragmatically, intuitively. Look around, see whether those plants have enough to share. And if the answer is no, you go home. For we remember that they don't belong to us. And taking without permission is also known as stealing. And the Honorable Harvest counsels that we also take in such a way that does the least harm and in a way that benefits the growth of the plant. Use everything that you take. It's disrespectful of the life that's given to waste it. The next tenet of the Honorable Harvest is to share it with others, human and non. The earth has shared generously with us, so we have to model that behavior in return. And a culture of sharing, we know, is a culture of resilience. Plant gatherers often leave a spiritual gift behind, but it can also be a material gift. Weeding, caretaking, spreading seeds, helping those plants to flourish. We give songs, we give ceremony, we give our respect, we give fertilizer. Every breath that you take is a breath that was made for you by plants. The water that you drink, whether you're in an urban setting, whether you're on a remote mountaintop, we still are recipients of those gifts. And if we take the time to be grateful, that brings us into that state of humility, of understanding that we are not at the top of a biological hierarchy, that in fact we are the younger brothers of creation.
For the patience. I must admit that it's the first time that I show this video not in front of the people that I talk to, so I cannot see your faces, and this is disadvantage for me. I mentioned that Professor Kimmerer is indigenous herself, and she was born and raised as a person. And usually my colleagues and students in the Western world, they are a bit annoyed by this video. A lot. I use it a lot in teaching, and I like to see the comments on the face of the students. Some like it, most are feeling a bit strange about, but I think it has a very strong message, which I like. So now we move back to archaeology or to archaeology, and I will talk a little bit about fact, which is are two very important words. The way throughout prehistory, people had a craving for fat, and people treated prey animals with respect. I believe these were two common consonants in the human presence on the planet. And I think this is a universal pattern among hunting societies, and this goes towards the relationship with different animal taxa. When we try to come to the equation that the result will be behavior, we usually put their physiology, anatomy, diet, hunting practices, stone tools, faunal remains, cognition, skill plates, but we don't put them fat and respect. And I think that fat and respect are strongly missing from this equation. And in order to the human behavior in the past, we need to take these two elements into account. And the third element that was mentioned as well is the concept of nothing is wasted, that everything is used in order to show respect and in order to make use of everything possible. Again, I think that fat, respect, and nothing is wasted are three basic elements that should be integrated, should be studied, should be taken into account. Again, these are two wonderful books. One about pleasing the caribou, but by making caribou outfits, and another one about whaling and the whaling ancestors. Again, if you have some time, these are wonderful readings. So before we go on to the Lower Paleolithic, I'll share with you some of the basic premises that I hold. And again, these are personal and you don't have to adhere or agree. In my view, Paleolithic people starting 2 million years experienced high energetic demands in terms of caloric intake. They need between 3,000 to 5,000 per day. This is agreed upon, I believe. This is more speculative or more under debate. The Paleolithic diet, in my mind, was based on the consumption of fat and protein supplemented by vegetal resources. Humans are limited by the physical ability to extract from protein, period. This is agreed upon. People cannot consume protein, meat unlimitedly. On average, get only 1/3 of the calories from meat. Natural vegetable food, especially without the use of fire, is unlikely to be sufficient for the daily calories, and fat can be consumed unlimitedly. Just a minute. Oh, the other way around. Okay. Fat is the densest energy source in nature. It provides 9 calories per gram at a minimal digestion cost. Fat provides a lot of elements, and many people say that fat is also tastes well, but again, this is a personal issue. Mega herbivores, and especially elephants, provide a unique combination of fat and meat, as well as extraordinary quantities and qualities, and we'll get to that in a minute. Throughout the Paleolithic period, especially the Lower Paleolithic period, but also the Middle Paleolithic period in Europe, the mammoths remains are found in many archaeological sites in the Old and New Worlds. It is evident that early humans consumed fat and meat for hundreds of thousands of years. In any place on the continent where humans and elephants human consumed elephants. I know that there are not a lot of evidence from India, mostly because of bone, but I hope that there will be evidence in the future. And as far as I see it, elephant and mammoths played not only a nutritional role in Paleolithic, but also constitute a major cosmological and ontological elements. And we'll get to that in a second. So people were sharing the world with elephants and other people were eating elephants and other taxa, not only elephant, they ate whatever that they could put their hands on, but they had a special feeling or meaning towards elephants, and we'll get to that in a minute. As I mentioned a minute ago, in many sites across all the New World, there are elephant remains in Paleolithic archaeological sites, and there are clear evidence of humans of Proboscideans for dietary purposes. Why specifically elephants? I will not enlarge, but elephants are the larger terrestrial animal. They weighed between 6 and 10 tons, and even more than that, 50 or 80 or even 100 times than a deer. But it's not only the weight, it's the amount of fat. Almost half of the calories in an elephant are in the fat. And we'll get to that in a minute. There's plenty of fat in an elephant. and there's plenty of fat in an elephant throughout the year. Do not lose a lot of fat during the lean seasons. So throughout the year, they have extraordinary qualities of fat. So the question is not why elephants, but why not? This is a wonderful page. About 2 years ago, we studied frozen mammoths from Pleistocene Siberia and analyzes the nutrition in mammoths. I will not read everything to you. I will just read this line, but this paper is full of data, scientific data about fat and protein qualities of mammoths, and they say that a medium-sized stored 1 million kilocalories as fat, providing clean energy for hunting group of 12 to 24 individuals for approximately 18 days. This is only the fat, while the consumption of variable amounts of meat would have extended this figure for some days. So a thing which is not very big could have sustained a group of hunter-gatherers for weeks. And again, evidence on that, this is just to make the point why elephants and mammoths are so special, mostly because of the fat. And now see the third and last clip of this talk. This is about an elephant butchery in the Congo Basin. In the Congo Basin, pygmies hunting elephants for nutrition, not for the tusks. They hunt them still with spears. There are studies being done on that, and we'll see a short clip. If you would like, we can talk about some of the details later. There's a larger video on that, and if you wish, I can the link with you. We will concentrate now only on the episode of butchering an elephant in order for you to understand the amounts of meat and fat that are within elephant.
But cutting up a full-grown bull elephant is serious business. By the next day, everybody with even the remotest claim to the meat has found their way to the carcass. The crowd includes those villagers who provided the spears and who claim to own Sangu and his hunter friends, and for that matter, their families too. But at a time like this, the villagers forget their pride. For the most part, the women keep out of the bloody struggle. They serve the purpose of guarding the ever-growing piles of meat thrown to them by their husbands. Before the tons of meat can be carried away, it must be smoke-dried to preserve it and to lighten its weight for the journey. Fires and meat racks are easily made from an abundance of wood. It takes about a day or two to smoke-dry the meat, and when it's ready, it may not look particularly appetizing, but it has lost more than half its weight. Nothing is wasted, not even the bone marrow. Using an axe provided by the villagers, a pygmy breaks open a huge leg bone of the elephant. Inside, the marrow is soft, raw, and ready to eat. It is also apparently delicious. The word spreads, and soon pieces of raw marrow are being eaten like candies.
Okay, but we stop here. I can watch it for hours because it has in details. Again, I needed to do that before, but I apologize in front of those who are not eating meat and need to see this. But at least in my view, Paleolithic people, before the advent of fire and before the of plants, had very little options. So they were eating meat and fat, at least the way I see it. So many sites, I give two examples from Israel. There is a correlation between megafauna, between elephants and bifaces. This is the well Gesher Yaakov. I know that Naama going about talk to you. I guess she mentioned that in the relation between bifaces and elephants. At Geshem not there is at least 100,000 years evidence of human presence while producing bifaces and eating elephants and other as well. This is evidence from the Lower Paleolithic Acheulean site of Revadim that we study, and again they found an elephant rib with cut marks alongside bifaces with used wear and residue of fat. These were used in animal processing, not necessarily the elephant, but why not? So there are evidence regarding some kind of correlation, association between elephants and bifaces. And a short and a very personal overview, because I know that there are people that think otherwise. And the way I see things is that the available functional, technological, and experimental evidence suggests that the primary bifaces was in processing animal carcasses. In some cases, handexes were used in other tasks than solely assisting the extraction of calories from different game taxa. But I argue that bifaces were used mostly in butchering large game. The efficiency and suitability of handexes in cutting, defleshing, and dismembering the carcasses, and in particular carcasses, large taxa, was repeatedly suggested. Handexes were efficient tools in processing large carcasses, enabling the removal of large quantities of fat and meat, and the separation of body parts in order to be manipulated and handexes allowed the application of considerable force and leverage during cutting and dismembering, and its continuous and mostly curved and sharp working edge is a massive and intensive meat and fat processing task, as you can see in this experiment below. There are many studies that highlight the functional efficiency of handexes on top of other elements like flakes or scrapers or whatever. That bifaces handexes were used particularly in the processing of large game. And again, this is only one example. There are more examples. So, in my view, bifaces, handexes were mostly tools that were intended to take part in processing of large game. Again, I know that there are people that think otherwise, and this makes life interesting. Paleolithic people use other butchery processes as well. We have shown evidence again from the site of Revadim that alongside handexes, they're using tiny flakes made by recycling for specific. They were using all kinds of tools in the butchery process. It was a long process that necessitated a whole toolkit, but bifaces were a very significant element. They use scrapers as well. They use set of tools in the processing series, but handexes were the most efficient and the most significant items, at least in my eyes, at least in relations with megafauna. And now we get to the bone handexes. Strange enough, Lower Paleolithic people, humans, across the old world, in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe, we're seeing once in a while, rarely, replicas, mimics of the stone by using bone fragments of mega herbivores, mostly of elephants. We've published that, so I won't get into this. I just say that bone bifaces were manufactured mostly from elephant bones. You'll see in a minute why I say mostly and not only. Bone bifaces are present only at sites where stone bifaces are present as well. There's no bone bifaces and the site without stone bifaces. They always go together, but there are not bone bifaces at every site. So we are familiar about 8 to 10 Lower Paleolithic sites with bone bifaces. And lastly, the hypothesis of a shortage in lithic raw material cannot be accepted. Some people suggested that the people in the Lower Paleolithic were making bone bifaces because of the lack of stone. This cannot be accepted because there are evidence that at all sites that this took place, there was abundant stone supply. This nice case from China, there is one bone handaxe from China, which was made from a mandible fragment. And this is a recent discovery published about 2 weeks ago from Konso, Ethiopia. It bone biface, which was made most probably not from an elephant bone, but from a hippopotamus bone. It's a fragment of a hippo bone, was shaped like a biface with dozens of removals. And most interesting, this biface, they have evidence of use work, and this bone biface was used in animal processing. So these bone bifaces used in a similar way to the stone bifaces, and we'll get to that in a minute. The author of this paper suggests that the fact that it was used include the possibility that it was kind of ritual, or it has some kind of symbolic significance. I think otherwise, but this is a very nice example of a bone biface which is 1.4 million years old, which was used, and at the Konso site there are many stones as well, and only one bone biface. So keep that in mind. Let's use some insights from the Innu. I go back to the Innu, and to this book, Bringing Home Animals, I use some interesting quotes from the book that led me in my thinking. It's not a parallel. It's not an analogy. These are insights regarding the relationships between people and they were dependent upon. So regarding hunting and respecting, Tanner writes this: a central conduct of hunting is that game animals are persons and that they must be respected. The rules of respect after the killing involve essentially taking care of all the carcass and not allowing anything to be thoughtlessly discarded. Thus, blood and intestines are consumed, buried or fed to the dogs. Bones are made into tools, hung in the trees, put on bone platforms, or put in the lake, and all uneaten meat is fed to the dogs or put in the fire, and it goes on. The more commonly held belief is that the inedible remains continue to be part of the species as a whole. This is important. The inedible remains continue to be part of the species as a whole, and that the proper treatment is a way of avoiding giving offense to the species in question, thus enabling hunting to continue. So they take special attention of the inedible parts. They care only about the edible parts, and they take this care in order to enable hunting to continue. Let's to the replica of the stone handexes, which are made of fragments of mostly elephant limb bones. So elephant limb bones were broken up in order to extract the marrow. Lower Paleolithic hominins took fragments of these and shaped them as a replica of the stone butchery tool that was used in order to process the elephant. The intimate physical contact between the hunter and the item made from the hunted animal provides humans with the perspective of the animal. More suggest, and we don't have to accept it, the butchered elephant bones were purposely selected in order to allow early humans to become elephants, to transform into elephants, to experience the elephant's perspective and abilities. The elephant bone handles might also have have constituted a token of respect towards the elephants, and that maintaining the special relationship and the continuous presence of elephants that enable human existent well-being. At least this is my interpretation or my thinking. As I mentioned in the abstract, mammoths were also present in what we call Upper Paleolithic art in Europe. I won't get into that in detail here. They use mammoth tusk and bone in order to make all these kind of magnificent items, while mammoths were still or at their last stages of existence in Europe. Generally speaking, people today are fascinated with elephants, and this comes for a reason. There are many similarities between elephants and humans. There are similarities in the physical aspect, in the physiological aspects, in the real and social aspects, and also in the cognitive and kind of conceptual aspects. I guess that many of you know the details. I'll repeat them here, and we publish them, but people share a lot of elements with elephants in many aspects. And this is why I think that they felt more closely related to elephants, and it was easier for them to accept that elephants are persons. And again, I won't get, we did publish a bit on that, so you can read it there if you are interested. I'm talking too much already, but to be done soon. 2 years ago, we published a paper about the persistency of the Acheulean handaxe, and unlike other suggestions like stagnation or studies or uniformity, that the fact that handexes were used, some people say almost unchanged, for over 1 million years across the old world, we suggested a different scenario. We suggested that this persistency is due to a well-grounded functional need, processing of large herbivores, which gave human hunting society an energetic security. Handexes fitted the needs of these people. This is why they lasted for so long, and through what we suggested as psychological kind of conformity and cultural conservatism, the handaxe became social norm, and we used the example of the chopsticks, of the Asian chopsticks, as an example of an item which is both an eating utensil and a cultural symbol which lasted very long, and it is both a tool and a symbol. So if we go to we know that handexes are varied in great details. They are varied in the type of stone. They are varied in size. They are varied in all kinds of elements. For example, there are handexes with all kinds of fossils embedded within them. There are large runs. There are some made of flint, basalt. This is the beautiful biface from Cima de los Huesos in Spain, which was a sort of a burial gift, and so on. So if we look at all of them together, we see a variety of phenomena between this artifact, which, in my view, are both tools and cultural symbols. Again, if we take the bone handexes, this is a wonderful example of the use of very specific material in order to produce an item which imitates, which replicate the most significant item. If I go again to the example of the chopsticks, we know the chopsticks are, as I said, eating utensil, which is made mostly of wood or bamboo. But even when it is made of wood and bamboo, only an eating tool, but it is a cultural symbol. But there are also chopsticks which are made of other materials like jade, gold, and so on. and some of these were used, but they were made of different precious materials, and there are not only some of them were used as eating utensils. So if you follow my line of think, not only the practical tools are also symbols or cultural symbols, but also the special ones can be both of these cons or biface. But I guess my colleagues would have a lot of arguments with me about that. But again, this is fine with me. In the end, this is, I think, the last slide, so bear with me. So the hypothesis that I want to put forward and to publish, and it is not done easily, I argue that early humans shared the world with large herbivores who were dependent for the successful adaptation and well-being, and had special relationships with the animals they were dependent upon. Moreover, handexes thus acted on both the practical and cosmological and ontological spheres. As long as large herbivores were around, were used both in order to process these taxa and to ensure the continuation of the special relationships between the hunter and the hunted. Once large herbivores were not longer around, new tool types were adopted in order to process and keep different relationships with taxa. And here I end. So thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry if it was a bit too long and